"Don't touch me, please." She whispered it like a prayer as the most dangerous man in the Mafia turned the lock behind him. At 19, Ilara became currency, handed over by her own father to clear a blood debt. The husband she was given to was cold, lethal, silent, the kind of man other men learned not to look at. But that night, he did the unthinkable. He listened. And with every day he didn't touch her, every lingering look, every boundary he honored, the more she ached for him to break them. In the world of the Mafia, wanting is where the danger begins. Chapter 1. The Bride. Nobody chose. The car came to a halt, and no one bothered to explain. For 40 minutes I'd been wedged in the back seat of an armored sedan, pinned between two men whose silence had not cracked once since we'd pulled away from downtown Chicago. The one on my left kept his jaw locked so rigidly, I half wondered whether he ever unclenched it to eat. The one on my right rested a hand on his knee in a posture I recognized immediately. Not rest, never rest, but the coiled stillness of a man waiting to move. I had no names for either of them. No idea if they were drivers, guards, or something worse. The only fact I possessed was that my father had put his signature on a page in a room I'd been kept out of, and the outcome of that signature was me. Bundled into this car, wrapped in a white dress that had appeared on my bed at dawn, with a single instruction folded beside it. Be ready at 7. I was ready. Not because I wished to be, because nothing else was permitted. The gate revealed itself through the trees like a verdict being handed down. Black iron, tall enough to reduce anyone who stood before it to something miniature. It parted with a deep mechanical grumble I felt in my sternum. Beyond, a bone-white gravel drive sliced through a lawn so dark and so flawlessly kept, it looked more like a stage than a garden, leading to a structure that did not resemble a house. It looked like the kind of place where decisions got made and people stopped existing afterward. The Cavalli estate rose in gray stone and narrow windows, its yellow lamps not welcoming but exposing, the lighting of a fortress disguised as a home. The sedan curved around a stone fountain at the center of the drive and stopped at the foot of the front steps. The man on my right climbed out first, opened my door, and waited without a glance in my direction, as if I were freight, and he were signing me off. I lowered my heels onto the gravel, felt them sink into the uneven stones, and pulled my spine straight because my posture was the last thing in this night that still answered to me. Chicago in October is a cold that punishes you for underestimating it, and the dress I wore was wrong in every way for the season. White silk, bare shoulders, a drape selected by someone with more influence than sense, meant to look elegant at a ritual with no elegance to speak of. I folded my arms across my chest as I climbed the steps, partly against the chill, yes, but more against what waited behind the door. My arms were the only wall I still had to build. The two men fell in beside me like extensions of the night itself. At the top of the stairs, one of them pushed open the double oak doors, and the entrance hall of the Cavalli mansion yawned open before me like something patient and hungry. The ceiling lifted itself to an unreasonable height, hung with a chandelier of iron and crystal that looked less like a light fixture and more like a warning in decorations clothing. The floor was dark marble so thoroughly polished it gave me my own reflection, and I refused to lower my gaze to meet it. I did not want to see how small I looked. The air carried old wood and wax, and beneath that something faintly citric, an attempt at warmth that someone had abandoned partway through. Every step I took struck the marble and came back to me multiplied. I had the irrational sense that the house itself had registered my arrival. A man materialized at the far end of the hall, emerging from a corridor to the left. Tall, gray hair brushed back with precision, a suit the color of slate, a face that had been trained into a total absence of expression. He looked me over in the time it takes to blink, and I understood without being told that I had just been evaluated and shelved. He offered no name, only a dry, courteous instruction to follow him. Later I would learn he was Vittore Cavalli, Damiano's uncle, the family's consigliere, a man who had long ago figured out that obedience does not require volume. I followed him down a corridor long enough to deepen the silence, to another pair of double doors. Vittore opened them without ceremony and stepped aside. The chamber beyond was wide and solemn, its walls paneled in dark wood, its floor the same marble as the entryway but softened by warmer lighting. Only a few sconces burned, casting light into islands and abandoning the corners to shadow. I catalogued the room in a glance, because the walls were simpler to read than what sat at the center of the room, a makeshift altar. Altar was not a word I reached for easily. Altars imply flowers, candles in rows, something resembling joy, but there was no other word that fit. A narrow table, draped in dark cloth, 2 candlesticks lit, a silver crucifix. Beside it, a priest. Small, white-haired purple stole laid over his shoulders, hands folded at his waist, eyes that neither approved nor disapproved of what was about to happen. He looked like a man who did this regularly, and had long since made peace with it. 2 witnesses stood at either side, strangers to me, their faces wearing the same resigned expression, here because they'd been told to be, not because any part of them wanted to be. And then him. Damiano Cavalli stood to the left of the altar, facing the door I'd just come through. The first thing I registered was the breadth of his shoulders. They filled the dark suit as if the jacket had been cut around him rather than before him. Then his hands, clasped in front of his body, a black gold ring on his right ring finger catching the candlelight for a flash of a second. Then his face. And at the face, I stopped cataloging. He was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. A hard jaw, a straight nose, dark eyes that worked like twin points of gravity. When they found me, my body answered before my mind had any say. Not with desire, with something older than that. The animal stillness that comes over you when something large has noticed you're alive. Dark hair pushed back from his forehead, 2 days of stubble softening a face the rest of which refused to soften, and a mouth that was neither smiling nor set, just present, the way a weapon is present when it has not yet been drawn. He looked at me. No hurry, no visible reaction. And I had the distinct feeling that he'd stripped me down to every layer in 3 seconds flat. The fear, the wrong dress, the curved shoulders, the attempt to look held together when nothing inside me was. My legs carried me toward the altar before I had chosen to move them. The room was not large, but the walk stretched, each heel tap on the marble counting out the distance. I stopped beside him. Not beside, half a meter off, because something inside me would not close that last small gap. He did not move to close it either. The priest began in Italian. I understood none of it, and no one offered a translation. The entire ceremony was shorter than a cab ride through the loop. No vows, no promises, no pause for objections, because what sane person would object to anything in a room like that? The priest's voice rose and fell, the candlelight trembled, and beside me I could feel the heat of Damiano's body, like a fire I was neither allowed to warm myself at, nor permitted to put out. At some point, Vittore stepped forward and passed a ring to the priest. Gold, plain, no stone, no engraving. The priest extended it toward me, and it took me a humiliating beat too long to realize I was meant to offer my hand. Damiano turned to face me. For the first time since I'd walked in, I saw him up close, and close was worse, because close I could see that his eyes weren't simply dark. They held amber at their core, buried like embers under a layer of ash, and the steadiness of his attention on me made my stomach twist. He extended a hand, open, palm upward, waiting. I set mine on top of his, and the difference between us registered before anything else did. His hand was warm, large, impossibly still, and mine was shaking. He felt it. I know he did, because his fingers folded over mine with a pressure so slight it was almost nothing, just enough to absorb the tremor without calling attention to it. That gesture, so small no one else in the room would have caught it, shook me more than anything that had happened all evening. The ring slid onto my finger, cold on the skin, then warming fast. I looked down at it and thought I had never worn anything so beautiful and so cruel in the same object. There was no kiss, no "you may kiss the bride." The priest crossed himself, closed his book, and left through a side door like a man with somewhere else to be. The witnesses filed out behind him. Vittore exchanged a look with Damiano, brief, waited with something I had no way to interpret, and followed them out. Then it was just the 2 of us. The room grew too large for its remaining occupants. The crackle of the candlesticks was the only sound between me and complete silence, and I stood there, staring at the cloth-draped table, as if it might hand me a script for what came next. The bedroom is on the 2nd floor. His voice caught me off guard, not by being loud, because it wasn't. It was low and tightly controlled, pitched almost beneath the scale of the room, but because until that moment, he had not been a man to me, only a presence, an outline, a force. Now he was a man who had just said the word bedroom to the woman he had married 6 minutes earlier, and every implication of that word came down on me at once. I nodded. I did not trust my voice. He moved toward the door and I followed. We crossed back through the long corridor, and this time, I noticed what the first walk had been too panicked to register. Paintings hung in weighty frames, a mahogany sideboard holding a vase of dried flowers, a door left half open onto a study sunk in its own shadow. The mansion was enormous and it was quiet, and every detail had been placed to impress or intimidate, and both were working. The staircase was broad, its wrought iron banister flanked by marble steps covered down the middle by a wine-red runner. Damiano climbed first, and I stayed 2 treads behind him, because that gap felt like oxygen. I watched his back, the span of it, the way the suit moved with him rather than around him, the carriage of a man who has never felt the need to check over his shoulder because he is whatever one might be checking for, and tried to force my mind to accept that this was my husband now. Husband. The word sat absurd in my head, like a coat 3 sizes too large. At the landing, he turned right into a corridor lit by sconces turned low. He stopped at a dark wooden door, opened it, and stepped aside to let me pass first. The bedroom was large, a 4-poster with dark drapery, crisp white linens, a leather armchair angled toward the window, a full-length mirror standing in the corner, heavy curtains drawn across what I guessed was a view of the drive I'd arrived on. The air smelled faintly of clean linen and cedar, and a lamp on the bedside table threw a soft glow that almost made the room look welcoming. Almost. I walked in and stopped in the middle of the floor, uncertain what to do with my hands, my body, my situation. Behind me, the door shut, and the click of the lock went down my spine like a wire pulled live. He'd locked it. I turned slowly. Damiano was leaning against the door with his hand still resting on the latch. He wasn't moving, wasn't advancing, wasn't doing anything, only watching me with those eyes that seemed to read each thought a half-second ahead of my having it. And what I saw in his face wasn't what I'd braced for. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't cruelty. It was something closer to patience. And that confused me so completely that my body moved before my mind had caught up. I stepped back. Once, twice, until the edge of the bed pressed against the backs of my legs, and then I sidestepped along it and kept retreating until my shoulders hit the wall. The stone's cold bled straight through the thin silk, and I spread my palms flat against it, as if the wall might swallow me whole and deliver me somewhere else. My heart slammed against the base of my throat, my wrists, behind my eyes, and the fear, that old, animal fear, the kind reason cannot touch, squeezed my voice thin and shaking, so quiet I barely heard the words leave me. Don't touch me, please. They hovered there between us like something alive. I had not planned them. I had not rehearsed them. They pushed themselves out of my chest on the force of everything I had swallowed that night. The sedan, the gate, the altar, the ring, the lock. Damiano didn't move. He stayed where he was, against the door, and his face did something I hadn't anticipated. It shifted. Not dramatically, not in any expression I could have named. Something in his eyes. One thing dimming, another thing kindling behind it, as though my 5 words had flipped a switch from one setting to another. His jaw tightened once, just once, and his shoulders, which had looked cut from stone until that moment, lowered a fraction. He pushed off the door. I went rigid. He didn't come toward me. He crossed to the armchair, shrugged slowly out of his jacket, laid it over the chair's back, and unfastened one cuff of his shirt. Then he looked at me from where he stood, his expression neither warm nor cold, but in some territory between the two I didn't have a word for. The room is yours. His voice was the same as before, low, contained, flat, but there was something altered in its cadence, the care of a man choosing each word the way you'd choose each step across glass. The door locks from the inside. Use the key if you want to. I blinked. He waited to see if I'd speak. I didn't. He walked back to the door, turned the latch, pulled it open. He paused on the threshold with his back half to the corridor, and looked at me once more. The hallway sconce caught one side of him, and left the other in shadow, and in that instant, with his jacket still over my armchair, and the door standing open behind him, Damiano Cavalli did not look like the man the world claimed to fear. He looked like a man working against himself to walk away. Good night, Alara. The door closed with a soft sound. No slam, no force, just the small mechanical fall of the latch, and then silence. I stayed pressed to that wall for an amount of time I cannot measure. It might have been 2 minutes. It might have been 20. My pulse slowly climbed back down out of my throat and into my chest where it belonged, and my knees gave by degrees until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the stone. The white silk pooled around me like spilled water. I looked at the closed door, at the armchair where his jacket still waited, at the ring on my finger. My name in his mouth had come out differently than I had imagined any of this. It hadn't sounded like a claim or an order. It had sounded like something he was putting away somewhere he did not plan to take it back out of. I had prepared for so many things. In the sedan, across those 40 silent minutes, I had built and dismantled dozens of possible futures. each one uglier than the last. I had prepared for brutality, indifference, cruelty. I had prepared my body to resist, and my mind to go elsewhere if the body failed. Nothing had prepared me for this, for him stepping back. For him handing me a control I had stopped believing could be returned to me. For him hearing 5 trembling words and treating them as an instruction he had no authority to ignore. That, I realized, sitting there on the floor of the bedroom that was now supposedly mine, inside the mansion of the man I had just married without consent, that was the problem. Monsters I would have known how to face. I had spent my whole life learning to survive men who take whatever they want. But Damiano Cavalli hadn't taken anything, and I had no idea what to do with a man who obeys. Chapter 2. The Monster Who Obeys. I woke with a stiff neck and the ring pressed into my cheek. For a few seconds the room made no sense. The ceiling was too high, the curtains too heavy, the cedar in the air belonged to no place I remembered. Then the night returned in one unbroken wave. The sedan, the altar, the latch turning, his voice saying my name just before he walked out. I'd slept on the floor, shoulder against the wall, the silk of the dress knotted around my legs and one hand curled protectively over my chest. The bed was still made. The white sheets lay smooth and taut, waiting for an occupant who hadn't been me. The light bleeding past the curtains was thin. A Chicago October morning, the kind that brightens without warming. I crossed to the window and pulled back the drape. The gravel drive, the exact lawn, the black gate. All of it quiet, all of it sealed. Beautiful the way any cage is beautiful when it's large enough to hide its own bars. Damiano's jacket was still draped over the armchair where he'd left it, carrying a woody note I preferred not to identify. I peeled myself out of the wedding dress and found clothes in the closet. Black trousers, a long-sleeved blouse, flats. Someone had stocked that wardrobe before I arrived, with pieces that fit me, and colors chosen, it seemed, to make me harder to notice. The bedroom door opened freely. The corridor beyond was empty, the sconces off, morning coming through windows at the far end. I went down the staircase, into the hall, followed the corridor on the left, walked straight past the room where last night's ceremony had happened, and kept going until an open doorway revealed the kitchen, and with it, the first sign that the house had living inhabitants. The kitchen was wide and serious, dark stone counters, a long central island where a coffee machine hissed quietly, and a plate of fruit sat untouched. At the far end of the island, perched on a stool with a mug in his hand, was a man I had not seen the night before. Tall, even sitting he radiated size. Broad shoulders under a black shirt with the sleeves pushed up past his elbows, forearms ridged with veins, and on the left one the Cavalli crest had been inked into his skin. A hard, angular face, pale eyes, cropped hair, and the expression of a man who had watched too many things fall apart to bother being startled by the rubble anymore. His eyes tracked me as I entered. No surprise, no shift. He registered me the way one registers a draft. "Good morning," I said, because someone had to cut through the silence. Soren Kessler. His voice was efficient and made no attempt at charm. "I work with Damiano. With, not for." I filed the distinction away. I took the stool opposite his, poured coffee into the cup that had been set out, and sipped slowly, letting the heat bleed into my fingers. Soren offered nothing. No conversation, no pleasantries, no effort to smooth the edges of the situation. He simply drank his coffee like a man sharing a counter with a stranger his boss had married by force, and treating it as an unremarkable Tuesday. Damiano's right hand since they were both teenagers, ex-military, a man who said what needed saying, and then stopped. I would piece all of that together later. That morning, he was only a large, well-contained silence on the other side of the island. Afterward I wandered, down corridors, through doors that turned out to be locked, past empty rooms, a closed library, a sitting room whose windows were barred on the outside. The mansion was stately, silent, and nowhere in it, no hallway, no shelf, no side table, was there a single family photograph, no portraits, no proof that anyone who lived here had a life outside business and control. Along a shorter corridor on the far side of the hall, a door stood ajar. Damiano's study. I knew it before I saw him. The same woody trace from the jacket, layered now with paper and leather. Through the gap I caught him behind a mahogany desk, phone to his ear, speaking Italian in a low, precise voice that didn't need any volume at all to sound lethal. He ended the call, set the phone down, and, without my having made a sound, said, "Come in, Alara." My stomach dropped. I pushed the door open and stopped 2 paces from the desk. The study was organized around that desk, a floor-to-ceiling wall of books behind him, a side window throwing late morning light across his profile, white shirt, sleeves rolled, collar open, the black gold ring catching the light when he folded his hands. "Did you sleep well?" On the floor, against the wall. Something passed over his face, too quick to name, too slow to be indifference. His jaw tightened, the same way it had the night before. "The bed is yours. Use it." "I didn't ask for the bed. You didn't ask for the marriage either. And here we are." The line could have been cruel, but it wasn't. There was a flatness beneath it that threw me. He wasn't being sarcastic. He was stating a fact, and in his mouth facts carried the weight of verdicts. Then he leaned back in his chair and told me, in the same tone, that I was free to move through the house, kitchen, library, garden, corridors. "Except the gate," I finished for him. "Except the gate." He said it without apology and without softening, and I understood then that he wasn't going to pretend this was something it wasn't. He wasn't going to gift-wrap the prison, and in some crooked way that honesty was easier to stand inside than a kind lie would have been. "Anything you need, go to Soren, the man in the kitchen who talks less than a door." The corner of Damiano's mouth shifted, barely, so slightly I could have invented it, except I hadn't. The faintest ghost of what would have been a smile on anyone else. "He's efficient," he said. "That I believe." I left the study with my pulse running too fast, and a confusion in me that had nothing to do with fear. He was blunt, cold, the kind of man who could say "accept the gate" without a flicker, and yet there was something behind the precision of him, in the pauses, in the almost smile, in the way "the bed is yours" had come out sounding heavier than 3 words should be able to carry. In the corridor, Soren appeared in front of me with the suddenness of a man who ought to have been audible at that size and somehow wasn't. He was holding a plate, a sandwich, an apple, a cloth napkin folded more carefully than I would have expected from a man whose forearms were the approximate diameter of tree trunks. "Boss says to tell you to eat." He offered the plate with the formality of someone delivering a summons. His words, verbatim. "If she faints, I'll have to explain it to someone, and I don't like explaining things." I opened my mouth, closed it. The sentence was so absurdly tuned to the wrong key that something dangerous moved up my throat and nearly made it to the corner of my mouth before I caught it. I almost laughed. I caught myself in time and turned it into a cough that fooled absolutely no one. I ate the whole sandwich standing at the counter and hated myself for every easy bite, because the food wasn't the point. The point was that Damiano had just finished a phone call, during which he had probably been calmly erasing someone from the planet, and the very next thing he'd done was dispatch his right hand with a plate, and I had no emotional drawer prepared for that. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't affection. It was something with no name yet. Dinner was by candlelight. The candelabra burned in the dining room. The air held the dark scent of roasted meat. Damiano at the head of the table, Soren on his right, and to his left a man I hadn't met before, shorter, heavier, with a pale scar running from his eyebrow down his cheek, carrying himself like someone who believed he mattered more than the furniture around him. Damiano gestured me to the chair beside this man, and I sat. The meal began in silence. I had barely lifted my fork when the scarred man leaned toward Soren, at a volume that pretended to be confidential. "Boss could have picked better, no?" I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Soren didn't move, but his eyes slid to Damiano with the speed of a man who already knew what came next. Damiano set his fork and knife down, aligned them on the plate, and raised his eyes to the scarred man, and something happened to the air. A temperature drop I felt on my skin before I understood what it was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't close a hand into a fist. He only looked, and the scarred man stopped chewing. It was a long look, 20 seconds, maybe 30, that stretched like hours. What lived in Damiano's eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse, the tranquil certainty that the man across from him had just made a mistake there was no returning from. The scarred man lowered his fork, dropped his gaze, pushed his chair back. Soren rose, walked around the table, and took up a position beside him with the presence of a wall that had decided to relocate. The two of them left through the side door. No one explained. No one asked. Damiano picked up his silverware and resumed cutting his meat, as if nothing at all had occurred. I finished the rest of the meal in silence, climbed the staircase, and went into the bedroom. This time I sat on the bed. His jacket was still on the armchair. The sheets still smelled of cedar. I sat there staring at the closed door and tried to sort what I knew. Damiano Cavalli was terrifying. That was as solid a fact as the stone walls around me. The way he had looked at that man, and rearranged the atmosphere of an entire room without so much as a raised breath. I had never seen anything like it. I had grown up around men who needed to shout to be obeyed. Damiano did not. And yet, he'd sent me a plate of food. He'd stepped back when I asked him to. He had said the bed is yours in a voice that carried more freight than the words themselves. And the man he had dismantled at dinner hadn't moved against the family, hadn't touched the business. He had spoken about me. That was all. And Damiano had answered as though nothing graver could have been said at his table. I lay down and pulled the sheet up to my chin. I closed my eyes. The fear I felt wasn't the same as the fear from the night before. It had the same shape, took up the same space in my chest, but it tasted different now, because it wasn't only fear anymore. Something else had threaded itself in under it, a warm current moving beneath the surface I couldn't pretend wasn't there, and something else frightened me far more than he did. Chapter 3. The Line Nobody Should Cross. On Friday morning, I found the library. It sat at the end of the left-hand corridor on the ground floor, behind a door I had tried the day before and found locked. This time it opened without protest, as though the house released its secrets on its own schedule rather than mine. The room was warmer than anywhere else in the mansion. Dark wood shelves along every wall, 2 leather armchairs angled toward a window that looked onto the garden, a reading table crowned by a green-shaded lamp, a thick rug that absorbed my footsteps before they could echo, old paper and old leather, and a morning light gentler than anything I had met since my arrival. But the books weren't what kept me there. At the corner of the table, half buried behind a stack of bound volumes, sat a landline phone, black, rubber keys rubbed smooth with use. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds, weighing consequences. Damiano had said I could move freely through the house, but he had never mentioned phone calls. And in this place, the line between allowed and forbidden depended on the temper of whoever ruled it. I closed the library door, lifted the receiver, and dialed Noah's number from memory. A string of digits burned into my head since I was 13. 2 rings. 3. Then Noah Kaplan's voice erupted down the line like she had been poised over the phone for 48 hours. Elara Stern, if you are not dead, I'm going to kill you myself. I pulled the receiver back from my ear. Noah had been my closest friend since grade school. For the past 2 years she'd lived in New York, worked in graphic design, and moved through life with an intensity that somehow reframed chaos as personal style. She had no filter between thought and speech, and right now her voice was the most familiar sound I'd heard in days. I'm alive, I said quietly, one eye on the door. Alive where? Your aunt called me saying your dad sorted out some family thing and that you were taking a trip. A trip, Elara. You've never traveled anywhere in your life, not even to Wisconsin. I took a breath and gave her the barest sketch. The marriage, the house, the man. I didn't use the word mafia. I said powerful family and hoped it would stand in for the rest. It did not. Wait. I could practically see Noah lowering herself into the chair of her Brooklyn apartment, coffee forgotten in her hand. Your father married you off to a man you've never met, from a powerful family, in Chicago. Elara, that's the mob. That's literally the plot of a book I read last month. Noah, is he at least hot? I opened my mouth to tell her that was deeply beside the point, that I was locked inside a mansion with no way out, that my life had been sold past me, that the face of the man who had bought me was the last thing on the list of things that mattered. Because look, Noah went on, giving me no window to actually speak. If I were getting married off to a mobster, he'd have to be at least a 9. Anything under that, and I'd be filing for a refund. Noah, I am being serious. So am I. Answer the question. I hesitated. 1 second. Maybe 2. More than enough. I knew it! Noah shrieked loud enough that I pulled the phone away again, my head snapping toward the door, my pulse firing. I knew it. Your silence said everything. He's a 9, isn't he? Tell me he's a 10. Please, for the love of God, tell me he's a 10. I have to go, I said, because it was true, and because one more minute on the line, and Noah would excavate things I wasn't yet ready to admit even to myself. You are calling me back, she said, and it was not a question. Tomorrow, if you don't call, I'm getting on a plane to Chicago, and you know I will. I know. I hung up with hands that wouldn't stay steady, and a small smile on my mouth that didn't belong to a prisoner. On Friday evening, Damiano invited me to dinner on the back terrace. Soren appeared at my bedroom door at 7 to deliver the message with his usual economy. Back terrace. Dinner. 8. He was gone before I could ask whether attendance was optional. I went down at the hour, passed through the empty dining room, long, dark table bare of plates, chairs empty, and stepped out through the glass door Damiano held open for me. The terrace was a stone patio overlooking the interior garden, lit by 2 iron lanterns and low candles on a table laid for 2. The October air was cold, but discreet heaters stationed at the corners kept the evening bearable. I took the chair he pulled out for me, an automatic courtesy he performed without seeming to notice, and looked at the setting. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a bottle of wine whose label I couldn't pronounce. Conversation began formally. He asked if I had found everything I needed in the house, if the library had pleased me, if the food was to my taste. Host questions, delivered in his usual controlled voice, as though he were managing a hotel, and I were a particular guest. I answered in clipped sentences, unsure what to do with the strangeness of dining alone with the man who had locked me inside his walls. But the evening shifted gradually. As the wine lowered in our glasses, and the night's cold pressed harder against the heat of the lanterns, something loosened in him. Without my asking, he told me that the garden had been his mother's, that she had planted herbs no one ever used and tried to coax flowers that Chicago winters would never let live, and that after she was gone, he had ordered it kept exactly as she had left it, because tearing it out felt more final than her death had been. He said it without drama, without asking for pity, in the same dry voice he used to say "accept the gate," but the words landed with a different weight. I watched him over the rim of my glass, and tried to fit that piece of information into the man I'd met so far, the Don who could rearrange the temperature of a room with a single look. Then, in a humor so parched I nearly missed it, Soren wanted to rip it all out and build a shooting range. I said no. He said flowers don't stop bullets. I said bullets don't stop flowers. That was the longest argument we've had in 10 years. I laughed. Without meaning to, without planning it, without being able to hold it back. A short, startled laugh that escaped me before I could stop it. And he went very still. He looked at me in a way that made my stomach close in on itself, as though the sound I had just made were a rare thing he intended to keep somewhere private. His eyes stayed on mine a beat too long, and heat climbed my neck in defiance of the cold. I looked away first. He went back to his meal without comment. On Saturday night, I stepped out of the bath and found him in the hallway. I was heading back to the bedroom with damp hair, wearing the sleep clothes someone had stocked the closet with, cotton pants and top, nothing suggestive of anything beyond sleep. I opened the bathroom door, 3 steps from my bedroom door, turned right, and there he was, standing in the corridor, halfway between the stairs and his own bedroom, which sat at the far end of the floor on the opposite side from mine. Dark shirt, sleeves pushed up, hair slightly disordered as though he had pushed a hand through it not long before. He was either going to check something, or returning from somewhere, or, I don't know. It stopped mattering, because the moment he saw me, he stopped, and I stopped, and the corridor folded in on itself. The sconce was low and gold, and it cut his face at angles that made his eyes look darker than they were. His gaze moved over my face, dropped to my mouth, and stayed there. He did not move. I could feel my heart slam against the inside of my chest hard enough that I was certain he could hear it. Because the hallway was too silent to hide anything, the air between us thickened. It wasn't only tension, it was gravitational, the kind of force that does not ask permission. He lifted one hand, slowly, and I watched his fingers come toward my face in something like slow motion, every millimeter heavy with an intention he was not hiding, and that I did not want him to hide. His hand stopped a breath short of my cheek. I felt the heat of his fingers without any contact. Then he drew back, 1 step. His hand returned to his side. His fingers closed once and opened again. "Good night, Alara." His voice had gone rough, as if the words were coming out against his own will. And then, he was gone. I went back to my bedroom on legs that did not hold me well, closed the door by leaning my back into it, and tried to catch my breath while the skin of my cheek burned at the exact spot where his touch had never arrived. Later I went down for water. It was past 11, and the mansion was submerged in that half-darkness it never quite emerged from. There was always a light on somewhere, a corridor illuminated, as if the house refused to fully sleep. I went down the staircase in bare feet, quiet against the runner, and I was halfway across the hall when I heard the voices. They came from Damiano's study. The door had been left open, and the volume carried all the way to the base of the stairs. Not shouts, but the raised cutting register that only exists when 2 men are trying hard not to shout and failing by degrees. I recognized Damiano first, and then the other, drier, more deliberate, Vittore. My Italian wasn't strong enough to track the argument, but one word rose 3 times with a rage that required no translation. Marchetti. The name sliced through the corridor like a warning. I didn't know who it belonged to. I didn't know what it meant. But the way Damiano was shaping it in his mouth, the same register I'd seen in his face at the dinner table, told me everything I needed to know. Whoever Marchetti was, he was dangerous, And whatever was being assembled on the other side of those walls, I was standing in the middle of it. I went back upstairs without the water. I lay in the dark with a tight chest, and the certainty that I was falling for a man whose world was built of things I did not understand, and that outside these walls, something far worse was waiting than anything I had been afraid of inside them. Chapter 4. The Price. She never knew. On Sunday morning, the quiet in the mansion had a different weight to it. It wasn't the usual silence, the trained kind, the sort that felt as though the walls themselves had been taught to absorb sound. This was the silence of absence. I came down the staircase and Soren wasn't at the counter. There were no low voices drifting from the corridor. There was no coffee, and coffee had become the first signal that the day had started here. The machine sat cold, the island empty, the pale morning light falling through the side window with no one underneath it. I crossed the hall toward Damiano's study with no plan in mind, only the instinct of someone who has already mapped the inside of her prison well enough to know which door sits where. The study door was ajar, not locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Empty. The leather chair had been shoved back from the desk as though he had gotten up in a hurry. The lamp was off. Only the window gave the room its dull gray light, spread across the papers on the desktop. Leather and wood still scented the air, but without him in it, the study felt like a stage after the play has ended. Every object in place, all purpose drained out. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that, but something pulled me toward the desk, with the same force that had made me dial Noah's number from the library the day before. The need to understand something, anything, about the world I had been folded into. The papers were sorted into stacks that followed some private logic. Contracts, documents on letterheads I didn't recognize, notes in Italian. I scanned without touching, until a single name stopped me cold. Henrik Stern. My father's name, printed in the middle of one stack, secured with a metal binder to 2 other pages. I slid the set free with fingers that had gone numb and read. It wasn't a long document, 2 pages, maybe 3, legal language I couldn't fully parse, but whose central phrases hit me with a clarity that turned my stomach. It wasn't a demand. It was an offer. The document didn't describe a Cavalli collection notice with conditions attached. It described a proposal, signed by Henrik Stern, dated 3 months before my wedding, in which my father had offered my hand in exchange for the full forgiveness of his debt. He hadn't simply agreed. He had suggested it. He had drafted it. He had signed it in the same steady hand I recognized from birthday cards and school permission slips. My father sold me, not like a man forced to give something up, like a man who places an item on a negotiating table and waits for the other side to accept. The paper shook in my hands, or my hands shook and carried the paper with them. I could no longer tell the difference. The study compressed around me, the air went too thick to move through, and the floor seemed to list under my feet as if the mansion had decided to lose its balance along with me. I set the papers back on the desk and walked out. I found Damiano in the inner garden. He was standing near the low stone wall that edged the flower bed, hands sunk into his pockets, his gaze lost somewhere in his mother's plants. The afternoon light cut his silhouette against the dark green of the foliage, and for a moment he looked smaller than he actually was, not in body, but in something I had no name for. He saw me before I said anything. His face turned as I came out through the side door that connected the corridor to the garden, and from the way his eyes dropped to my hands and then climbed back to my face, I knew he understood at once. You knew. My voice came out torn, louder than I had meant it, and I didn't care. From the beginning, you knew he offered me. He didn't look away. He didn't deny it. He didn't move. I did. One word. No apology, no context, no softening. And that single word landed like a fist, because up until that second, up until the confirmation in his voice, a part of me had still been hoping the document was a misunderstanding, that there was some explanation, that my father wasn't the man those pages said he was. And you accepted. The fury in my voice surprised even me. I did. Why me? My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of him. Not in that garden. You could have said no. You could have collected the debt any other way. Why accept a person as payment? Damiano drew his hands out of his pockets slowly. He took a single step toward me, just one, and stopped, as if he understood that any closer would be a mistake, because I knew the house you were coming from. His voice had something in it I had not heard before. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't control. It was the careful deliberation of a man choosing his words, knowing that they could wound more than any weapon he owned. I knew the kind of man your father is, the kind who offers his daughter in a negotiation, and then goes home and eats his dinner like nothing happened. I didn't buy you, Ilara. I accepted you because it was the only way to get you out of that house. I stood there with the October wind moving between us and the soft sound of the garden leaves filling the space his words had left behind. I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant that Damiano Cavalli, the Don, the monster, the man who could drain the oxygen from an entire room, had done something for me that my own father had refused to do, treated me as someone worth protecting. I feel betrayed by everyone, I said, and my voice finally broke, not into tears, but into the tone that comes just before them, the register of a person held together with fingernails, feeling the grip begin to slip. By my father, by you, by my whole life. He didn't try to touch me. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He only stood there, in his mother's garden, watching me with eyes that seemed to carry more weight than any one person should have to carry alone, and he held my gaze while I came apart in front of him without permission. That evening, I was in the sitting room on the ground floor, curled up on the sofa with my knees drawn against my chest, when I saw the car. The room had a wide window that looked out over the front of the mansion, the gravel drive, the fountain, the iron gate. The entrance posts cast the driveway in an amber light, and I was staring through the glass without really focusing on anything, when a dark car rolled to a stop on the far side of the gate. It didn't come in. It just sat there, headlights burning, and after a moment the driver's door opened. The man who climbed out was tall, elegant, in a dark overcoat, carrying the posture of old money with newer intentions. Even from that distance, under the lamps, I could see the smile. Wide, calculated, the kind of smile that always seems to be hiding something sharp behind its teeth. He walked up to the gate and stopped there, hands in his pockets, with the ease of someone waiting to be received at an address where he had not been invited. Damiano appeared on the drive less than a minute later, coming from the side entrance of the mansion. I saw him through the glass, the long stride, the tense set of his shoulders, his whole body radiating a rigidity I hadn't seen in him before. He stopped on his side of the gate, facing the man, and the two exchanged a few words I couldn't hear. The conversation was brief. The overcoated man gestured with a theatrical sort of calm, and Damiano stood motionless, his jaw set so tight I could see the tension even from where I sat. And then the man looked up, at the window, at me. The look held for 2 seconds, maybe 3. It was direct, precise, deliberate. He knew I was standing there, and he wanted me to know that he knew. I stepped back from the glass on instinct, my heart banging against my ribs, and a cold nausea unfolding low in my stomach. The man returned to his car. The headlights came on. The car slid away down the street. Damiano came up to my bedroom 20 minutes later. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap, the image of that look still lodged in my head. He knocked twice, 2 short, clean knocks, and waited for me to tell him to come in. I did. He stopped near the door, his jaw still tight, his eyes carrying something I hadn't seen in him before. Not anger, but the kind of tension that belongs to a thing that has existed for far longer than this night. Who was that man? Lucian Marchetti. He said the name the way one says the name of an illness. Heir to the family that controls the port of Chicago. 2 generations ago, the Marchettis were Cavalli allies. They broke the pact. And 5 years ago, they executed my father inside this house. The air locked in my throat. The word I had heard the night before, in the argument between him and Vittore, slotted into place with weight and meaning, and everything abstract turned solid. Why did he come here? He didn't come to negotiate. Damiano took a step into the room and stopped at its center. The lamp caught his face from below, deepening the shadows under his eyes. He came to look. He wanted to see whether I have anything worth taking from me now. The sentence sank between us with the slowness of a stone dropping through dark water. I understood before he had to say another word. Lucien had not come about the gate, or the casinos, or the business. He had looked at my window. I was the something. You are the Don's wife, Damiano said, as though reading my thoughts were simply one more of his abilities. In this world, that makes you a target. I should have told you earlier. I looked at him, at the man who had pulled me out of a house where I had no worth, who had handed me back the key to my own door, who had sent Soren with a plate of food, who had stepped away from me when I asked, and who was now standing in my bedroom telling me the truth about the danger I was in instead of hiding it. You're telling me now. He held my gaze. And in that second, I saw something that reshaped everything I had understood about the week behind me. Damiano Cavalli did not trust anyone. I already knew that, but he was trusting me. He was opening the door to a world he kept under hard lock and letting me look into it, not because I had asked, but because he believed I deserved to know. He left without saying goodnight. He closed the door with the same care he always used, and I sat there on the edge of the bed, the ring heavy on my finger, two new truths occupying the same space in my chest. My father had sold me, and the man who had bought me was the only one treating me like someone who deserved the truth. Now I had to decide, stay by choice, or try to leave before his world closed over me entirely. Chapter 5. No fear, no shadows. I woke to the gray light of Monday morning slipping through a gap in the curtains, and to the sense that someone else was in the room with me. I didn't flinch, which should have been strange. Any presence in that room, in the days behind me, would have pulled me upright with my heart in my throat. But the thing that woke me wasn't alarm. It was recognition, as if some part of me already knew who was there before my eyes opened. Damiano was in the armchair, asleep, head tipped to one side, arms folded across his chest, legs stretched out, shoes still on his feet. His jacket lay over the arm of the chair, the same spot it had occupied on the first night, and his white shirt was rumpled in a way I had never seen him allow. Without the usual tension in it, his face looked younger. The hard line of his jaw had softened. His lips were parted slightly, and there were shadows under his eyes that the daylight was not generous enough to hide. A strand of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and I felt an absurd, irrational pull to brush it aside. But I didn't move, because moving would break the moment, and the moment was the most real thing I had witnessed since I had walked into this house. He had stayed all night, after Lucian, after telling me about the Marchettis and leaving my room with the same measured care as always. At some point he had come back, sat in that uncomfortable armchair, and not moved since. Not to watch, not to control, only so that I wouldn't be alone with the fear he knew I was carrying, because Damiano Cavalli noticed things in me that I hadn't yet found the words for myself. I watched him longer than I should have. His hands, folded over his chest, hands I had already seen hold a fork with surgical control, hands that had made a man stand up from a table simply by setting themselves down beside a plate, hands that had closed around mine at the altar with the barest pressure, just enough to steady a tremor I hadn't been able to hide. Without the suit, without the command in his posture, without the look that stripped oxygen out of rooms, Damiano was only a tired man who had slept in an armchair so that the woman who hadn't chosen him could sleep. And it was there, that gray October morning, watching him breathe while Chicago woke up on the other side of the glass, that I made my decision. I would stay, not because I couldn't leave, not because the gate was locked or because I had no other address to run to. I would stay because for the first time since I had set foot in this place, I wanted to be here. I wanted to be near the man who obeyed when I asked him to, who trusted me with truths that could have destroyed him, who slept in armchairs so that I could sleep in peace. This wasn't obligation. It wasn't resignation. It was a choice, the first I had made since my father decided I was something he could barter. In the afternoon, we went down to the garden together. He woke without a start. His eyes simply opened, found me sitting on the edge of the bed watching him, and held there for a few seconds, as though he needed a moment to remember where he was and why. Then he straightened, dragged a hand down his face, and looked at me with an expression that was half embarrassment and half something deeper he wouldn't let reach the surface. I said I wanted some air. He said the garden was open, and without either of us planning it, we walked out together through the side door and along the flower bed his mother had planted. The garden looked different in daylight, greener, more alive, with herbs growing undisciplined along the stone wall, and autumn flowers stubbornly insisting on themselves despite the October chill. The wind brought a smell of damp earth and dry leaves, and the low Chicago sky diffused the light to a soft wash that cast no shadows. An iron bench sat under a tree that had already shed half its leaves, and that was where we settled, side by side, with enough space between us for the air to circulate, and close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body. He spoke first, without prompting, without preamble, as though the words had been stuck too long, and this bench was the first safe place they had found. He told me about his father, about the night he was 21 and heard the gunshots inside his own house, about walking barefoot down the staircase and finding the body in the study, the same study where I had found the document the day before, with two men he knew by name standing in the doorway, as if they had been waiting for him, about the guilt of not having been there in time, of having left that evening when something inside him had said to stay, about the years that followed, when he inherited the family at 26 and learned that leading meant deciding alone, sleeping alone, carrying everything alone, about the revenge he had carried out at 24, cold, methodical, untrembling, which restored order and took away whatever lightness had still been inside him. He spoke without asking for pity, without dramatizing. In the same controlled voice he used for everything, but with new pauses between sentences. Pauses too short to be hesitation, too long to be breath, as if each word cost him something he wasn't used to paying, and he was paying it anyway because I was there to hear it. I listened without interrupting, without judging, without offering, "I'm sorry," because "I'm sorry" was too small a thing to hold the weight of any of it. I only listened, with my hands in my lap and the wind moving between us, and I let him pull from his chest whatever it was that needed to come out. At some point, without thinking about it, I reached across the space between us and took his hand. He looked down at our joined hands as if he had never seen such a configuration before. His, large, rough, marked by fine scars along the fingers I hadn't noticed until now, stayed still for a second. Then it closed around mine with a careful pressure, as if he were holding something that might come apart if he squeezed. "I don't remember the last time someone did this," he said, eyes still on our hands. His voice was low, almost buried under the wind. We stayed like that for a length of time I didn't count, on the bench under the tree, while October carried off the last of the leaves, and his mother's garden went on existing around us, as evidence that some things survive, even when everything says they shouldn't. A voice came from behind. "I'm going to pretend I didn't see this. Carry on." Soren stood about 3 meters off, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the face of a man who had blundered into a room he should not have entered. He delivered the line with the gravest expression he owned, set the cups on the end of the bench without looking at either of us, turned on his heel, and walked back down the stone path with the stiff posture of a strategic retreat. I looked at Damiano, and I saw something on his face I had never seen on it. The corner of his mouth had lifted. It didn't quite complete into a smile. It was the closest version Damiano Cavalli seemed capable of producing. It lasted less than 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds, that millimeter of humanity on the face of the man the world feared, were worth more than any full smile could have been, because that almost smile was his. It was rare, and I had been there to see it. That night, we went upstairs together. The staircase was quiet, and the sconces threw long shadows along the walls. He opened the bedroom door and stopped in the doorway, his shoulder leaning against the frame, his eyes on mine, waiting. He didn't step through. He didn't move. He only stood there, handing the decision back to me, the way he had from the first night, the way he did with everything. "Stay." He came in, the door shut behind him with a soft sound. 3 paces separated us. He closed 2 of them with the caution I already knew belonged to him, every motion measured, every inch timed to give me room to change my mind, but I was not going to. And when he was near enough that I could feel the heat of him and that woody scent that was no longer only his, because it had woven itself into the room and the curtains and the sheets and into me, I tipped my face up and met the amber in his eyes that looked at me as if I were the most dangerous thing he had ever had to face. He held my face in both hands. His thumbs drew the line of my cheekbones with a lightness that was at odds with the size of his hands, and with everything I knew those hands were capable of. His fingers were warm on my skin, and I felt every point of contact like a small flame, at my cheek, along my jaw, behind my ear, where his thumb grazed once by accident and caught my breath. And he kissed me. It began slowly, mouth to mouth, unhurried, deliberate, like a man memorizing something. I fisted a hand in the front of his shirt and pulled, feeling the rumpled fabric under my fingers and the tense muscle beneath, and a low sound moved in his throat and traveled into my mouth. The kiss deepened, took on weight, carrying the taste of days of held-back restraint that could no longer be asked to wait. His hands moved along my back, slowly at first, as though he were testing each new span before daring the next. But something in the way my body leaned into his must have said what I could not say aloud, because his fingers closed at my waist with a pressure that was no longer caution. It was hunger. The difference between them stole the breath out of me. He guided me backward until the edge of the bed met the backs of my knees, and we went down together, him bracing above me on his forearms, breath unsteady, dark eyes fixed on mine. I pulled his shirt up and felt the warm skin of his back under my palms, the muscle that contracted under my touch, the small shiver he tried to hide and couldn't when my fingers traced the line of his spine. He murmured my name against my neck, not like a word, like a surrender, and his mouth moved slowly down my skin, a controlled urgency in him that pulled a quiet sound out of me before I could stop it. The intensity climbed until the air in the room felt too thin. His hands were everywhere, in my hair, at my waist, and then at the hem of my blouse, which he lifted slowly, fingers grazing the skin of my stomach as he waited, as he gave me room, as he did the hardest thing a man like him could do. Let me decide. And I decided. I said his name quietly against his ear, and his whole body answered, a tremor that ran across his shoulders, down his arms, and ended in the fingers that closed around my waist, as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had lost its footing. Then he stopped. He rested his forehead against mine. Our breath came hard and tangled in a space so small I could no longer tell which was his and which was mine. His eyes found mine, and that close I could see everything. The amber in them, the blown pupils, the visible force he was using to hold himself still. His voice came out wrecked, low, hoarse, heavy with the restraint he was pulling on with every fiber he had. I want you completely. No fear, no doubt, no shadows. I tried to say I wasn't afraid. He silenced me with a kiss pressed to my forehead. Long, slow, so different from the kisses before that my chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with pain. When you're sure, he said against my skin, his lips still against my forehead, with no trace of obligation in it. I'll be yours. All of me. And that sentence, spoken by a man who could take whatever he wanted with no one to stop him, carried more weight than any declaration of love might have, because it was not about what he wanted. It was about what he refused to accept, unless I was entirely inside the choice. That refusal, that ferocious patience that appeared to cost him more than violence would have, was the most powerful thing anyone had ever done for me. He rolled onto his side and pulled me against his chest. I fit into the space between his arm and his body, as though the space had been cut to my shape. His warmth along my back, his heavy arm over my waist, his breath slowing against my hair. His chest rose and fell, and I began matching the rhythm without noticing, and the steady beat of his heart at my back was the safest sound I had ever heard. For the first time since I had arrived at that mansion, I didn't feel like a prisoner, or a hostage, or a price. I felt chosen. And the difference between being forced to be somewhere and wanting to be there was the difference between everything. We fell asleep like that, legs tangled under the sheet, his warmth laid over me like a second skin. Tuesday morning I woke and he was still there, not in the armchair, in the bed beside me, his arm across my waist, his breath warm and even against the back of my neck. The light came in stronger than the day before. Chicago's sky must have finally opened after a week of gray, and the room looked transformed by it, warmer, more real, more mine. I didn't move. I lay there feeling the weight of his arm and the warmth of his chest at my back, and I let the morning exist without hurrying it. Out in the garden, the same gold light would be falling across his mother's autumn flowers, and I thought maybe I understood those flowers a little better than I had imagined I could. He woke slowly. I felt the exact instant it happened. His arm firmed, his breathing shifted cadence, his fingers at my waist moved a fraction as though to confirm I was still there. He didn't say good morning. He only pressed his mouth briefly to my hair, an emotion so automatic I knew he hadn't thought about it first, which made it better than any planned gesture could have been. We went downstairs together. For the first time, side by side on the staircase, no two-step gap between us. The kitchen was bright with morning and the coffee machine was already running. Soren leaned against the counter with his usual mug, and when we walked in, his eyes registered the reduced distance between Damiano and me, then returned to his coffee without a word. But the corner of his mouth twitched, and from Soren Kessler that was the equivalent of a belly laugh. Damiano poured coffee for me himself. He didn't ask Soren, didn't call anyone. He lifted the mug, filled it, set it on the island in front of me beside the fruit plate I already knew by heart. The gesture was simple, natural, as if it belonged to a routine that had already existed, though it was actually being born in that moment. And when his fingers brushed mine as he passed the mug, he didn't pull back. He let his hand stay there a second longer than he needed to, and in that second, I felt more than any words could have given me. I drank my coffee in silence at the island, Damiano standing beside me, Soren across the counter. No one spoke, but it was a silence that did not resemble any other silence I had known inside that house. It wasn't the concrete silence of the first night. It wasn't the brittle silence of those early dinners, weighted with everything nobody said. It was the silence of three people who did not need words to share a room, and there was something profoundly simple about it, something I had not expected to find in that house, in that life, beside that man. A week ago, I had arrived at this mansion inside an armored car, in a dress I had not chosen, and a fear too big for my chest. I had said, "Don't touch me, please," to the most dangerous man in Chicago, and braced for the worst. The worst never came. What came instead was the respectful silence, The jacket over the armchair, the plate of food, the almost smile, his mother's garden, the truth about my father, the hand that stopped a breath from my face and waited until I invited it in. I watched Damiano over the rim of my mug. He was drinking standing, shoulder against the cabinet, eyes on the window, and the morning light caught his profile in a way that made his eyes look lighter, amber rather than dark, warm rather than impenetrable, as if the morning were revealing a version of him that existed only at this hour, in this kitchen, before the outside world remembered who he was. He sensed me watching. He turned his face to mine, and his eyes met mine with a calm that was no longer the same calm as before. Before, his calm had felt like control. Now it felt like peace. And I knew, with a certainty that did not need words, that this man was mine. Not because a contract said so, not because my father had decided it, but because I had chosen, and he had let me choose. And we both knew that changed everything. He didn't say anything. He only held my gaze a second longer, and the corner of his mouth moved again. That was worth more than any full smile. I finished my coffee. The morning kept going, and for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow, the next shock, the next truth that would rearrange the floor underneath me. I was simply there, in the kitchen of the Cavalli mansion, drinking coffee beside the man the world feared, who had slept next to me because I had asked him to. And it was enough, until I discovered what was no longer enough. Lena here. That wraps up book 1, and I've already finished book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I had finally stopped being afraid. After weeks beside the most dangerous man in Chicago, I discovered the most confusing truth of all. It was in his arms that my body forgot how to tremble. Then someone ripped that away from me. I woke up in a dark basement, smelling of mold and old blood, and a man was watching me as if he knew exactly what I was worth. He didn't need to say much. The way he smiled was enough for me to understand he wanted to break me where Damiano never touched. That's right. He wanted to take my virginity, out of pure ego, just to win. But on the other side of the city, he is hunting. And when he finds me, nothing will come back in one piece. I just hope it's not too late. Like I said, that was just a taste of book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side.